Hi there, I'm Dr. Sam Carr, and I'm making this series of videos about attachment theory. And this is the next video in the series where I want to talk about perhaps the most popularized idea in attachment theory that really does permeate popular culture and pop psychology, and that's the idea of adult attachment styles. And I want to talk today about, well, what are adult attachment styles? How does attachment theory understand them? And what do they reflect? And what are some of the things that we know about them? That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to start simply by saying that in the previous videos, I've spent quite a bit of time looking at how our first, what you might call our first attachment style, or you might not use the word style, but you might say our first attachment patterns develop in the relationships we share with our earliest caregivers. And the whole premise of attachment theory is that we get this first model of attachment that we build from our interactions with our caregivers in the very first caregiving relationship that we share, which for many of us will be with our parents, but not always. But the question then with adult attachment is, okay, so if we develop this early sort of style of attachment that's basically a reflection of the environment we've grown up in, how does it change as we grow and develop into adulthood? And John Bowlby himself, the father of attachment theory, he argued, and you can see this in the quote above, that there are turns, and attachment turns and changes at each and every stage of the journey, and it all depends on the interactions between the organism, and he's meaning basically they're the person, as it is at that moment in time, and the environment in which it finds itself. And that's a really important quote to think about, because what he's basically saying is, even if we do develop this prototype, this first model of attachment, it's our early sort of, it's a part of our personality in a way, it's a part of how we relate, and we develop that style based on the caregiving environment we have in our early years. What he's saying is we will then go on to form close bonds with other people in our life. We will take with us that model, but those other people are not the same people as our caregivers. They may offer us things in relationships that our caregivers don't offer us. They might offer us a sense that we're worthy, lovable, valuable, where our caregivers didn't give us that. They create new opportunities, new information, new relational experiences. And what Bowlby's kind of saying is we adapt in some way, shape or form. And exactly how this happens is very, very complicated, to the point where I don't think we really know exactly how it happens. But you might say, well, it's a bit like we take a piece of plasticine that's already been molded inside us into the next close relationship we have, and the next one, and every close relationship sort of slightly remodels the one we already have. Sometimes it's the case that if we've developed a very insecure model of attachment in childhood, we then move on to another close relationship that reinforces that and sort of makes it even more sort of cemented that we can't rely on the world, that nobody's there for us, that we're not lovable. And we go into relationship after relationship after relationship that, rather than changing our model that we had from childhood, we simply reinforce it, make it more and more crystallized, less and less likely maybe to change in the other direction. But in other cases, we might meet new relationships and new close others that really challenge the initial idea of ourself and others that we had, and create the opportunity for us to relate in different ways. What Bowlby's kind of saying is, as we move through life, we will meet new close relationships, new people will step into our lives, and they will, and our relationship with them will, one, be dictated a little bit by the model of attachment we already carry, but also our model of attachment will be a bit shaped by that new relationship. And there is a lot of evidence in the literature that does tend to happen. How do we think about attachment in adulthood? Well, that's where you're going to hear a lot this idea that we all get lumped into a box. You're either a securely attached person, you're an insecure, anxious attached person, you're an avoidant, or you're a fearful. There are these 4 attachment styles that we talk about a lot, and people talk about them in pop culture as though they are sort of identities. It's like this sort of fixed identity that you have. My partner's an avoidant, or my partner's anxious attached, etc. They're spoken about as though they're fixed entities and sort of 4 separate categories. But what I want to do in this video is just explain in a bit more depth how the field of social psychology particularly views attachment. And I'm going to put a little diagram up that I think is one of the most popular models of attachment and how we conceptualize adult attachment. So by the time we get to adulthood, this model suggests that there are 2 what I would call dimensions of attachment. You could think of them a bit like 2 empty cups. One of them has been called attachment avoidance, the other attachment anxiety. Now, on the diagram above, you'll sometimes see attachment anxiety called a dependence, but they're meaning the same thing here. I use the term attachment anxiety, but others will use the term, as they do in this model here, dependence. But basically, you're talking about these 2 dimensions, dependence and avoidance. And the idea, and again, this is only an idea, this is how we explain it, but that doesn't mean it's truth. Although there's quite a lot of data to back up that it makes sense to look at it this way. What we're saying is everybody could have varying levels of each of these cups, essentially, these dimensions of attachment avoidance and attachment anxiety. Putting it very, very simply, attachment anxiety would be, or otherwise called dependence in the diagram above, is basically reflecting your model of self. Now, if you have very, very high degrees of dependence or attachment anxiety, that means you really do not have a very positive perception of yourself. You have a very negative perception of yourself. You don't believe that you are capable of surviving or coping with challenges that the world throws at you. And because of that, you're very, very dependent on other people. So your model of self is negative when we're talking about high levels of attachment anxiety. Your anxiety, we use the word anxiety, comes from the idea that basically your model of self doesn't see you as able to stand on your own 2 feet in this world. You're highly dependent on others. So you have a negative model of self. Whereas people who have no or very low levels of attachment anxiety, they're not highly dependent. There's nothing wrong with dependency per se, but they don't have so much of it that they do not believe they can cope on their own. So they have a positive model of self. Lower levels of attachment anxiety mean you have a kind of positive model of self. You see yourself as someone who can stand on your own 2 feet in the world, who's got your own back, who's able to cope should the sea get stormy in your life. Now, with avoidance, what we're really talking about there is the model of the other that you carry. People who have high levels, if your cup in terms of attachment avoidance is full, it means you have a very negative perception of other people, especially in relation to closeness, intimacy, emotional connection. You don't believe other people are trustworthy, worth getting close to. It's risky to get close to them, so you avoid other people. You've got a very negative perception of them, and a high level of avoidance basically means, well, I don't see other people as a worthwhile source of connection, closeness, intimacy, so I will avoid them. And that's what high avoidance ultimately means, a negative model of others. When you have low levels of attachment avoidance, it means you have a positive model of others, as in, there's no reason to avoid them. Others are trustworthy. You can get close to them. It's fine to open up to them. In general, close other people are seen as valuable, profitable, worthwhile. What you get basically is the idea in attachment theory is that these two levels, everyone's got a level of both, and lots of different measurements and inventories and questionnaires and surveys have been developed over the years to measure, well, how much of attachment avoidance and how much attachment anxiety do each of us sort of have in a given relationship or in general. And the idea is we measure those. And what you'll see is that the 4 attachment styles, which you can see on the diagram above, that we typically talk about, which are securely attached people, preoccupied or otherwise called anxious attachment, dismissing attachment, otherwise called avoidant attachment, frequently, and then fearful attachment. Basically, they're each different in relation to the combination of attachment avoidance and attachment anxiety you have. In the top right corner of this diagram, you can see the preoccupied attachment style, the classic anxious attachment style, typically talked about and thought about as people who are needy, clingy, worried about the availability of their partner, maybe constantly checking on their partner. Are you home yet? Where are you? Worried about abandonment. What that attachment style tends to reflect, as it shows in the model here, is a negative model of self, as in high levels of dependency, and also a positive model of the other, which basically translates into, I'm not okay in the world, you are, so I need you to be okay. And that's basically reflected on the diagram in high dependence or attachment anxiety. There's a lot of that cup that's full. The other one is not full, because you do have a very positive model of others. People that fall in that space on the diagram with high-ish levels of dependence or attachment anxiety and low-ish levels of avoidance, they're your classic anxiously attached or preoccupied attached individuals. That's what their attachment style would be like. Whereas in the bottom left corner, the dismissing corner, which is what we might call the classic avoidant attachment, you're talking about people who have a very positive model of self. They don't have high levels of attachment anxiety or dependence. They can rely on themselves. They believe in themselves in the world, but they don't believe in others. They have a high level of attachment avoidance. They're the kind of people that are, I've got this, I can cope on my own, I'm fine on my own 2 feet, and and others are not reliable or valuable, or getting close to them is not profitable to me, and I don't want to do that. That's your classic kind of, I'll keep away from others and I'll deal with everything on my own because I've got my own back. I'm not saying any of these with judgment. I'm saying this is how we conceptualize those styles. And then you've got the classic secure attachment style in the top left of the diagram. That's basically people who have a positive model of self. I can cope. I don't have high levels of dependency or attachment anxiety. I can cope with the world on my own. I believe in myself. I'm okay. And I also believe in others. I don't have high levels of avoidance either. So if I need closeness, I see it as profitable, but I'm also okay on my own. We see securely attached people as simply the combination of low levels of attachment anxiety, low levels of attachment avoidance. That's how we see it. Whereas in the bottom right corner, you see the classic fearful attached profile. That's where people do not believe in themselves. I'm not okay in the world. I don't feel safe, and neither are you. It's a bit like, I'm not okay on my own in the world. When things get stormy, I need other people, really need them and depend on them, but I don't trust them. I also avoid them. And that's a very interesting predicament to be in for people's attachment characteristics. There's how your basic attachment styles sort of are created from these 2 dimensions and the combination of them that people can exhibit and do exhibit. But then there are massive questions like, well, do you have one attachment style? that doesn't change and you carry it with you from relationship to relationship? The answer is probably no. Does your attachment style depend on you or the other? Probably a bit of both. There are obviously going to be people, when you measure attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance, these two separate dimensions, who have kind of moderate levels of both. On the diagram, they'd kind of be in the middle. What does that mean about them? That they have no particular attachment style? They're a bit of everything? What does that say about people? Because a lot of people fall in the moderate range. Not everybody falls neatly into one of these 4 boxes. What you can see is also there's a lot of complexity about it. It's not as simple as everyone just fits neatly into a box. When you think about it in this way, you can see that it's quite complex, adult attachment. Equally, we might move around, even within the same relationship. It's possible that our levels of attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance could go up or down in response to particular things that happen in a relationship. I think the idea that we are sort of all just an identity that fits into one of these 4 boxes is way too simple, and the literature kind of reflects that. It's much more complex and nuanced than that. But what I'm doing here is I'm just simply showing you the way that we conceptualize adult attachment as we move into adulthood, and also how that does map onto the 4 attachment styles that you might have heard of. But to say, the caveat being, there's a lot of complexity in it. And a lot of that complexity I'll talk more deeply about in other videos. But in this one, I'm just explaining the conceptual model of adult attachment.